Hi, welcome. This is the Infernoman. And if you're new to the channel, we focus on three things here when we play Magic the Gathering Arena: budget, jank, and fun. Today we're going to be talking about the first thing you should try to craft in Magic Arena, which are rare and mythic wildcards, and that is the land base. Now, just because we play jank and budget on this channel, that doesn't mean we ignore all the wildcards we have acquired. In fact, I actually want to help you make the most of the wildcards you have earned. So, to begin, we ask ourselves, why are lands so important? Well, if you're looking to make a tier 1 deck, or if you're trying to upgrade the budget decks we have played on stream, you need to make sure that your mana base is consistent. Being set back a turn due to a tap land that does nothing, or if you have an inconsistent mana base that doesn't get you what you need when you need it, can cost you a game, or at worst, a whole match. And if you've seen some of my streams, yeah, you've seen that that's happened before. But with that, keep in mind, this guide isn't here to touch upon every land available. I mean, if you look at what we have right now, goodness, there is a lot of lands to go through. But don't worry, we're basically going to be here to prioritize specific lands that are going to make the most out of almost any deck you can build. So with that, let's go ahead, let's get started. To begin, the shock lands are going to be the first set of cards you should be crafting. If you're going to make a 2 to 5 color deck, then these are definitely going to be essential. If you are new, what I'm basically talking about is a shock land is a dual colored rare land that enters the battlefield tapped unless you pay 2 life, i.e. shocking yourself. The benefits of these lands is you can choose to have them enter tapped or untapped, so you actually don't have to pay the 2 life. Say like you get this out on turn 1, the benefit that you can have is you can have it enter untapped, and say like if you're trying to get something out on turn 2, then you don't have to worry about paying the 2 life early. If you are more of an aggressive deck, you have that option, which is great. Sometimes the paying the 2 life is a small price to pay in the long run in order to get something out faster and start making your moves a lot more in response to your opponent. The other benefit is that these lands also have land types added to them, and which we'll discuss in a little bit as to why that's relevant. So if I was to go to something like the Steam Vents, as you can see, it's a land, but it specifically says it's an island and a mountain. Again, we're going to go over why that's a big thing in just a little bit for the next land. The good other thing about these lands is all 10 of them are available thanks to the Guilds of Ravnica and Ravnica Allegiance sets that came out. So you can craft them all if you really want to in one go. I do understand though that does mean that's up to 40 rares that's going to cost you to make all of these. So instead of trying to go all out with that, I would say first off, figure out what kind of deck you want to build first. If you want to start simple, stick with something that's a 2-color deck, and then build at least one playset of these. And then as you start growing and as you start gaining more cards, you can start building out more and more. The second set of cards that you want to craft would be the check lands, aka buddy lands. These are the lands that enter the battlefield tapped unless you control a land that shares a type that they are quote-unquote checking for. So, for example, if I wanted to go to, say, a Dragon Skull Summit, this is a card that enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a swamp or a mountain. If you just remembered, I just talked about right now the shock lands. This is why I was mentioning that it's important to have the corresponding shocklands with these. So the example for this would be Dragon Skull Summit, and the shockland for that would have been the Blood Crypt, because the Blood Crypt is both a swamp and a mountain. These now synergize very well with it, and it makes it really easy for them to come into play untapped. The other good thing about having the buddy lands in the format right now is all 10 are available, as you can see. Half of them are from the Ixalan set, and the other half are from Dominaria. So you're able to also craft these from the get-go. Now, I do admit that some people out there have acknowledged that maybe you want to craft these ahead of time, but again, there's no real wrong or right way to do this. I still think, though, the shocklands are going to be more of a priority. You can make an argument that maybe if you're going for a monocolor deck and you want to add in, say, like the buddy lands as maybe a way to splash into a second color much more easier, that could be an option for you. Now, I know what some of you people are probably thinking, well, what does it mean to splash? Some of the newer players, I'm sure, are unaware what that means. It basically means that, again, you're adding in a second color, or sometimes a third color, just to get maybe 1 or 2 cards that are critical to your deck itself. But as for splashing itself, I don't want to get into that right now because that's going to be a whole nother topic we can discuss in another video. So with that, let's go ahead, let's continue on to the next color. So our third set of lands will be the double-faced land cards, or as I like to just simply call them, the pathway lands. They're from Zendikar Rising. Unlike the last 2 set of lands that we discussed, which were the shock and buddy lands, these ones enter the play untapped. There's no other fancy schmancy requirements needed, which is great for our deck. Now, having said that, they only come in, however, as 1 color. So although you can see some of your pathways have 2, as you're putting it down, you have to pick one side or the other, and you can't flip it back later on. So you're going to have to pick on the spot and be really careful which one you want to do. So from my personal experience with these are great for dual color decks. If you are playing a deck, however, in the future that's going to require 3, 4, or 5 different types of mana, then the problem is you'll see that these lands are going to be a lot more restrictive due to that limitation. So this is why I would put these in the 3rd tier, below the buddy lands and below the shock lands. That does not mean that these colors are bad. It's just, again, when you get to more multicolored decks, these are going to be a lot more restrictive. These are also fine for if you're going to try to splash into another color. But again, as I mentioned, we'll talk about splashing in another video. The other odd thing is right now there's only 6 of them in the current format. However, the remaining ones will be released from what I believe with Kaldheim releasing in early 2021. So if you're waiting on these, don't be afraid to hold out for a little bit longer until you can get the other ones and when you can start pulling them also from other packs. Now the next set of lands are going to be a toss-up between the sets. First off, the dual-colored cycle lands from Amonkhet Remastered, and then the Scry lands from Theros Beyond Death / Core Set 2020-2021. Whew, let's try to say that 5 times fast. All of these lands enter in tapped, which is unfortunate, but both sets have their own benefits. First, we'll talk about the cycle lands. Cycle lands themselves, although enter in tapped, they also have a cycle effect, which is 2 colorless, i.e. 2 of any color, which you can then cycle away the card by discarding this land and drawing a card. That's going to be helpful for when the land is in your hand and you don't need it and you're trying to draw into action. The cycling effect is also great as it cannot be interacted with versus your opponent, and if you need to fill your graveyard for, say, maybe an escape mechanic, this is going to be helpful in a pinch. Lastly, also these cards have a small benefit of having relevant land types. So as you can see from the Sheltered Thicket here, it has both a mountain and forest type to it. So if you do have buddy lands also in your deck, these also benefit from that. As for the Scry lands, as their namesake is, you are scrying for 1 as they enter the battlefield. And again, for those of you that are unaware, scry just basically means you look at the top card of your library, and you can keep that card on top if you like it, or if you don't, you can also put that card underneath to the bottom of your library, which helps you kind of fix your draw to a degree. In comparison to the other lands that we just talked about, the Pathway Flip lands, the Shock lands, and the Buddy lands, these lands are going to be less than ideal. Just because I said that, though, that doesn't mean I'm saying these lands are bad. In truth, these lands are going to be more beneficial for a control-style deck. In control decks, you want to make sure your next draw is going to be fixed. You're going to be able to set up what you need to without being interrupted on what you have. So, for control decks, maybe the mid-range decks, these are going to be fine to use. But if you can get to the Shock lands, the Buddy lands, or the Modal Flip lands, go ahead and use those instead. And also for aggro decks, I would say maybe these are probably going to be less than ideal, and maybe even more so avoid these, because for most of your aggro style decks, you want to make sure that you're hitting everything on curve or even ahead of curve and start swinging, which if your land comes in tapped, will not allow you to do. Okay, so the last card in general I wanted to bring up is Fabled Passage. This is a very unique fetch that at face value doesn't seem like it's much, but it's actually very powerful when used correctly. So reading the card very briefly, Fabled Passage allows you to search your library for a basic land card and you put it onto the battlefield tapped. Then you shuffle your library, and if you control 4 or more lands, you untap that land. So keep in mind the keyword here for Fabled Passage is it's just 4 or more lands. So when you time this correctly, you basically can get a fetch for a basic that can help you maintain your momentum and help you fix what you need. Also, the good news for fetches is for those of you that don't play other formats such as Modern or Legacy, fetch lands are also very important to have. In our current formats, we're a little limited right now, but with Fabled Passage alone, this card helps you thin your deck just a little bit by getting one card out of the deck that is less likely to draw you a dud and helps you maintain more consistency. The final benefit is to have select creatures and abilities that actually do trigger off when a land enters the battlefield. And for some of them, they do trigger multiple times if a second land or a third land were to enter, like Omnath, but he's banned anyway, so we won't talk about that. So just anyway, keep in mind, if you're looking to make a deck where lands matter, keep in mind Fabled Passage is beneficial for you. And also finally, some decks, even monocolored, sometimes even use Fabled Passage where certain effects are necessary to use a fetch. Well, with that, that wraps up all of our essential lands. I know that there's a lot more lands we didn't cover, such as colorless lands, the triomes, special lands that flip under certain conditions, but we'd be here for way too long if we were trying to explain all that stuff. This video was merely to point out to you the most important lands you might want to craft first if you don't already have them. And with that, that's all I got for you guys. I mean, do you agree or disagree with the selection that I made? Do you feel like there's other lands that you should be prioritizing first? Either way, feel free to leave a comment below and tell me what you think. That's all I got for this video. Thanks again for watching, guys, and I hope that this was helpful for some of you. Be sure to like and subscribe, and until next time, when in doubt, jank them out. See ya!